October 2010, 3:33 p.m. My father and I were both on our mobile phones, attempting to have a very difficult conversation. The connection was spotty at best, long, silent gaps, dropped words. Frustration was building at warp speed. Yet, hanging up and talking later was not an option. I'd reached my tipping point. I needed answers. The time to talk was now. A couple weeks prior to this unpleasant conversation, I had written my parents a breakup letter. Dear Mom and Dad, I can no longer tolerate the dysfunction in our relationship. Sorry, not sorry. We need to deal with the giant, ugly monster growing between us, or I'm done. Well, that's not an exact quote from my letter, but more or less is the gist of it. I was done sugarcoating the family shit. In the actual letter, I carefully addressed how the residual effects of the ugly monster, also known as my father's father, was still causing discord in our current family dynamic. I clearly stated that until they got some help with their struggles and issues, that I just couldn't be around them. It was too painful. I encouraged them to take their time, process, discuss, and get back to me. In hindsight, I guess I should have sent it certified mail because I got no response. I was on pins and needles for about 2 weeks, waiting to hear something, anything, an email, a voicemail, a relayed message from my then husband or my brother, a messenger pigeon, perhaps. That'd have been cool. But nope, I got zero, zilch, nada. And then I got antsy. So I called my mom, and she said, "What letter?" Oh my God. What letter? Wow. I sensed by the candor in my mom's voice that most likely my dad had intercepted my letter and kept it to himself. I suggested she ask Dad about the letter and that we should talk later. I had to hang up. I was about to lose it and say things that could not be unsaid. I was crushed. I was shocked. I was also super fucking pissed off at my dad. I had poured my heart into writing a clear, concise, compassionate letter in hopes of moving our family forward, away from the pain. I was 41. We were all officially adults. And I was finally able to voice my concerns about our suffering connection, and I was asking them to own their part in it. So back to this phone call with my dad. That was not going well at all. I was asking him why. Why did you hide it from Mom? Why did you leave me hanging like that? Why? He put it back on me pretty quickly. No, I'm sorry. Not even, it's just too much. Instead, he scolded me in that parental, "how could you" tone of voice. He blamed me for causing more pain, more grief. The exchange got heated, and he said, "Yeah, well, Michelle, I can't believe what you wrote in your letter. It was hurtful, inconsiderate, ungrateful, and depressing. And I never thought you would make me feel that way. As a cancer survivor, I've been through enough. I don't need any more pain." And without hesitation, I raised my voice to match his and replied, "Yeah, well, I'm an incest survivor, and I can't." Click. In less than 5 minutes, we had escalated from a very grown-up father-daughter conversation to two caged animals baring our teeth and lashing out at each other from our wounded souls, our deepest pains. This was nearly 30 years post-trauma, and yet, once again, my dad and I found ourselves mired in the messy muck of our dark and twisted roots. In my family, a fear of the dark was real. The monster was not imaginary. He didn't live under my bed, he entered my bed. The abuse started when I was 5 years old. Like most predators, he made me promise to keep a secret or else. And the secret keeping business went on for years. I obeyed out of fear. He was scary. He was powerful. And over time, he had me convinced that ours was a special relationship that no one else would understand. Nor would they believe me if I told the truth? So I stayed silent for a very long time, but not without making a deal with myself. I created my own finish line for this silent suffering, but before I could cross it, someone in my family had to die. That someone was my grandmother. I vowed to protect her and spare her the pain of witnessing the implosion of her family, because she was married to this asshole that I only refer to as my grand monster. It felt like a fair deal at the time. I'd continue to white knuckle it, manage the days ahead as best as I could until she passed on. I figured I could handle it, because so far I was doing a pretty good job fooling everyone into believing I was just a normal kid, being normal, doing normal kid stuff. I was now 12. The abuse had stopped, and my beloved grandmother died shortly after my 19th birthday. In those 7 years, I kept the secret and navigated through my teens, carrying this burden of truth. Somehow, I successfully managed to appear normal, but on the inside, I was a ticking time bomb, walking a tightrope without a safety net. In my 20s, my 30s, even into my 40s, I spiraled in and out of control, physically, emotionally. The ups and downs were pretty messy. Yes, I was getting help. Yes, I had tons of therapy sessions along the way. But still, ever since those original sips of poison were tipped in my direction by my own flesh and blood, I've been questioning everything and everyone around me for every single decade of my life. Brainwashed, sexually violated, riddled with invisible scars. Yes, me too. I was so young when it started that the only me I know is post-trauma. In living with PTSD all these years, at this point, I find myself feeling mostly healed most of the time. And that feels awesome. Awesome. When all is going well, my trauma memories are at rest and safely out of my daily routine, and I go about living my life. But when triggers happen, as they do, PTSD flare-ups follow. Some are bigger than others, and these last few months have rocked my inner girl. My father and I never directly discussed my sexual trauma. He only learned of the sordid details from my therapist back in 1988. We also had never actually shouted at each other or had that kind of ugliness between us. And after that extremely uncomfortable mobile-to-mobile call, there was a long silence to follow. Little did I know that the next time we'd speak, it would be several months later in a post-op recovery room at the hospital. And shortly thereafter, I'd be sending him emails that read, "Hi, Dad. Good to talk to you last night. Glad this first part of chemo is going okay for you. Hope it stays that way throughout your treatment. I read the interview with Joan Rivers. Good little Q&A. Thanks for sending me the link. Talk to you soon. Love, Michelle." May 2012, 4:35 a.m. I had been asleep for a couple hours on my parents' pull-out sofa when the nurse woke me with his kind and gentle voice. It's time. Please come into the room. I took a moment. I walked into the kitchen for a second or two, and then I opened the front door to breathe in some fresh air. It was drizzling that morning, and I remember inhaling the smell of wet asphalt. Then slowly, I walked down the hall and into my childhood bedroom that had been recently transformed into the hospice space for my dad. I joined my mom and my brother in silence. As I crossed the threshold, I felt my energy shift. This was now a sacred space. My old room would be where we ushered my dad through his last moments of life. Time seemed to trip into slow motion. I found myself moving at a pace that matched my dad's labored breathing. We whispered words of love. We wept. We kept our hands on him until all was silent in the room. It was my first time being in the presence of death, and it was beautiful and peaceful in the saddest, most bitter-sweet way possible. 19 months had passed since I wrote that breakup letter, and a lot of healing happened in that time frame. As a kid experiencing chronic trauma, my psyche gave me a gift of going numb. Kind of like a natural anesthesia, I would go into some kind of twilight state so that while stuff was happening to my body that should not have been happening to my body, my spirit would leave the building. As a kid, I'm fairly certain that phenomenal coping skill was the key to my survival. As a recovering adult, not so helpful. So as I have dealt with the debris of my trauma, my soul's work has been learning to stay in my body and be fully present in the skin. Not an easy task. Even now, after decades of therapy, triggers happen, and at times I still want to go numb, exit my body, abandon my feelings, and fly far, far away. Yet, in light of all of this, I still consider myself to be a very lucky human. I'm lucky that my mom and dad believed me when I disclosed my trauma history at age 19. I'm lucky that my dad and I found peace before he died. I'm lucky to have a fantastic circle of loyal and true friends. And I envision this circle of love to be much like the dial of a compass. And I know, near or far, they've got me surrounded. 360 degrees of love, wisdom, and acceptance. And days when I feel lost and I need to break the trance of chaos inside me, my chosen tribe always shows up and holds a space for grace as I work my way back to feeling found, seen, heard, and loved. Speaking of love, I happen to love trees and their roots. A few years back, trees became my muse for making peace with my poisonous roots. I used to think that if I were a tree, I'd be dead. But I'm not a tree. I'm a human, and I'm not dead yet. And over, with each breath I take, I get to choose to stay rooted here, now.